I've been waking up really early recently. That probably explains why I have so much acne and I am speaking louder than I should be. As most of you guys know, I went to Japan, and during that time, I woke up every day really early, like the entire time. That screwed me up, but at the same time, I had an epiphany. I should wake up earlier. After Infinity War, also, I've been really pumped about everything. I've been just staring at my figures a lot, which is a little weird. Not that weird. Don't judge me and my friends. But yeah, today we're gonna be talking about the top 5 Marvel movies of all time. Keep in mind, I'm not gonna put the Fox Marvel movies or the Sony Marvel movies either. Thank you for coming back to Marvel. So yeah, here's the top 5 Marvel movies. It's strictly MCU, and all right, we'll start with number 5. Also, I did get a haircut, so let's just get that out of the way. Nobody cares. Number 5, I would put Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one. I mentioned this in the previous video. I remember when the trailer came out, all my friends were like, what is this? And even I didn't really know too much about the Guardians. They were the Space Avengers. I knew Star-Lord was their leader. They had a tree, sentient being thing. Rocket Raccoon, I knew that he was smart. I just didn't really know too much about the characters. And honestly, I thought it was not going to do that well. It shattered that. I liked how the characters interacted with each other. I felt like they actually liked each other, unlike the Avengers, where they had like little rivalries going on. But with Guardians, I just had a good, fun time, like stress-free. Yes, I do get stressed watching Marvel movies sometimes. But also I feel like it was like the only movie to kind of do something like Star Wars that Star Wars did. I don't know if that makes sense. They're the only non-Star Wars movie that Star Wars properly. That probably makes more sense. It's a fun, feel-good movie, and that's why it deserves to be on my top 5. So moving on to number 4. Number 4 has to be Spider-Man Homecoming. I remember there was a press conference with Andrew Garfield. He was talking about how it would be really cool to see his amazing Spider-Man character be put into the MCU, and I was like, oh, that's cool, I guess. It's like back in 2012. I just didn't see that version of Peter Parker Spider-Man properly being fit into the MCU, because it's like Tony Stark, Peter Parker. I feel like those two would definitely clash. When I was little, what triggered me into really liking Marvel and wanting like an Avengers movie was seeing the 2002 Spider-Man movie. I talked about this in my reaction video, so if you guys want to check that out, I'll link it over here. When I was little, I always wanted to be Spider-Man. I always wanted to have his powers and swing and all these things. However, I lived in Southern California. I didn't really live near tall buildings. I just thought if I had Spider-Man's powers, it would be really useless there. I can't wall crawl a 2-story house. If I shoot a web, where am I gonna shoot it to? And they put Spider-Man in those situations in Homecoming. I always thought of, well, how would Spider-Man do if he's not placed in New York? And they did just that. By putting him in Washington, D.C., you could tell that he was really nervous, not being surrounded by a lot of tall buildings, except the Washington Monument. The MCU does not have a shortage of bad villains, but the Vulture, every time Michael Keaton's Vulture was on screen, I just felt a menacing presence while I was watching the movie. I'm super pumped for what they're gonna do with Spider-Man for the near future. Which is also weird because Sony also is going to make like a Spider-Man villain kind of movies, but they're not gonna put Spider-Man in them. Number 3 definitely goes to Avengers, the first Avengers, the original Avengers. I dreamed of that movie way before Iron Man 1, since I was a kid. And it met all my expectations. How the characters met after having their solo movies, them having their own chemistry together. Loki, of course. The fighting action sequences were great, and also the jokes, man. The jokes landed in that movie. A lot of people think Mean Girls is the most quotable movie ever. For me, it's definitely Avengers. I watched that movie over 38 times. I am not over exaggerating. I'm like being dead serious. Who am I kidding? I'm probably gonna watch that movie after this. My battery's dying. Oh no. That literally took me 30 minutes to find a spare battery. Number 2, Captain America Winter Soldier. A discussion I always had with like some of my friends was they liked other movies more than Marvel because they liked the dark tone of movies. I guess. Winter Soldier was Marvel's answer to everyone that thought Marvel couldn't do dark type of movies. movies. It felt more of like an espionage and political sort of movie, where we find out that Hydra, the Nazi death cult, is actually inside S.H.I.E.L.D. and it infiltrated it for years. The movie was very clever. I think the action scenes in that movie definitely memorable, especially when Bucky is fighting Cap with that knife, throwing it and catching it. That was amazing. It made Captain America a lot more likable. I went into that movie with no expectations, but it exceeded my expectations. So Cap, Winter Soldier, boom. Before I get into number one, I want to mention some honorable mentions because all these top 10, top 5 videos have honorable mentions, so why not have an honorable mention? If I had to pick a number 6, I would definitely pick Thor Ragnarok. I did talk about this in my review of that movie. Although Iron Man 1 started the MCU, and that was a really good movie, Iron Man 1 brought in Captain America and Thor, the original Thor. Those are pretty good origin stories too. Origin stories? Ant-Man and Doctor Strange was fun. That fight sequence with Falcon and Ant-Man, yeah, that was a good scene. Doctor Strange, Beyonce, good stuff. Yeah, no, but Avengers Age of Ultron was also good. Although I didn't understand why they didn't assemble for the possibility of Tony Stark getting killed by the Mandarin, the Nazi death cult, and S.H.I.E.L.D. almost taking out everybody. And Malekith basically destroying the world, but then they assembled for a possible location on Loki's spear. Good movie! Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was pretty good too, no? Huh. Iron Man 2 also had pretty good moments. Like the technology there was pretty cool. Oh, and you were introduced there too. But if we're gonna talk about technology, Iron Man 3 probably had the best suits. The Mandarin thing was what the heck. The suits were great, especially when Igor came out. I thought that was a Hulkbuster. Hulk? Hulk, the Incredible Hulk. Although they didn't have Mark Ruffalo back then, I thought that movie was pretty good. But that one scene where Hulk kicks Emil Blonsky, and what's a cool way to kill 2 hours of your day? Probably watching Thor the Dark Thor, Gods vs. Elves, spending that. So that's my honorable mention list. Number 1. Captain America Civil War. It was a great way to answer the Ultron problem. The character chemistry with everyone and the newcomers was really good. The hero-on-hero fight, it was a new, fresh take on superhero movies as a whole, and they did it right. That airport sequence when they were fighting each other, I was like, oh my gosh, that's definitely one of my favorite scenes in all of cinema. It carries the narrative of the MCU further. For instance, Infinity War. Infinity War is going to be a catastrophe. When Thanos and his Black Order, they come, the Avengers, they're still not in good terms with each other. Some are war criminals, some are not. I know that Cap and Tony Stark, they had like that phone call or whatever. I think we see Tony Stark with that flip phone in the Infinity War trailer, but that's not enough. The Avengers hurt each other a lot. Also in the Infinity War trailer, we don't necessarily see Cap and Tony Stark in like the same room, and that's a first for the Avengers films. That movie the direction was fantastic. Usually I'm a Team Iron Man guy because of Spider-Man and I just love Iron Man, but throughout that movie, I understand this team, but I also understand this team. There was no clear winner. It was just a movie to break the Avengers up, and the main reason why I loved that movie so much was because Spider-Man was introduced to the MCU through that movie. That announcement of Spider-Man coming back to the MCU was released on my birthday the year prior, and I was like, how are they gonna shoehorn Spider-Man into the MCU? But they did it perfectly. He was fighting everybody. When he came on screen, I just had the craziest geek squirm ever when I was watching that movie. It also didn't feel like an Avengers 2.5. It actually felt like a Captain America story, while it featured everyone else, but it did feel like his movie. It's weird because Captain America isn't really my favorite Avenger. He never really was. I always thought he was just kind of like boring and he's like the leader type, but it's interesting that my top 2 favorite movies basically Captain America. Still Team Iron Man though. Okay, that's it for today's video. Bye guys!